about that. Okay, and I'm unmuted. So I was having some issues this morning and I didn't know we were live already. So good morning and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Earning Curve. The Earning Curve is a newer platform and webinars and a little different from others you may have attended in the past. Of course, if you are a longtime Earning Curve attendee, you realize this. We let all of you ask the questions. So since the audience drives the panel, start thinking of your questions. My name is Marianne Vanguardi, and I'm the head of business development at Schmershel Treloar and Company. Today's topic is understanding your professional sales types and why that matters. Our experts will share their perspectives on hiring the right salespeople that will be a great fit for your sales team and organization. Since all of you drive the panel, start thinking of your questions and enter them in the chat. There's a thought bubble icon at the bottom of the screen, and you can just go ahead and send questions to me and I will read them to our panelists. Let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. Today, our anchor panelist is Christy Jones from the Sales Acceleration Group. Christy has 19 plus years as a sales leader. She's helping founders increase revenue through improved strategy, process, and people. Fun facts, she interviewed Dennis Hopper at age 17, and she is a true crime junkie. Next, we have Karen Kopp with Kopp Consulting. Karen is the chief door opener at Kopp Consulting, whose door opener service has helped thousands secure initial prospect meetings at the executive level. She is the best-selling author of Biz Dev Done Right, an internationally recognized speaker. Karen also, or her fun fact, Karen's father got his dream job at Macy's after being told there wasn't a decision yet. He said, okay, I'll see you at 9 a.m. on Monday. And Karen has often used this tactic. He was also in sales and owned his own company. Next, we have Ryan Brecht. Ryan is the vice president of sales enablement at Spoke Marketing. Ryan is a founding creator of the Earning Curve as well. He's an avid outdoor enthusiast and he enjoys cooking. And I'm still waiting on an invite to one of his dinners that I see posted on social media. Kim Baker, next is Kim with the Vivid Performance Group. Kim is an award-winning sales representative, a sales manager and leader. She has over 25 years of sales experience in manufacturing, medical diagnostics, IT, and professional services. Fun facts about Kim, she loves a thrill. She's performed tandem skydiving and acrobatic sailplaning, taken trapeze lessons, and flown around the Daytona Speedway. So before we open it up to all of your questions, I want to ask Christy a starter question as the lead panelist. After she responds, I would love for the other panelists to comment as well if they wish. So to get started, Christy, what are some of the things that a hiring manager should be looking for before going out to hire a new salesperson?
Thanks, Marianne. Welcome, everyone. Marianne, I think, a lot of people go out right now. It's an interesting, I just read an article on Wired magazine yesterday about the Great Resignation, right? So employees are leaving in droves, which means hiring is probably at an all-time high. And so I think, we're in a very special place right now, still dealing with the global pandemic and the effects of that. So I think, companies, hiring managers, HR, sales leaders really need to sit down and think about what is it that I need right now for my team, for my company? What are the characteristics, the competencies, the traits that will best fit the situation? As we're seeing, remote work is still in full force. And so, I think things like independence, a higher level of independence seems important right now. I'm seeing a lot of people that are, they're looking for more independent individuals, people with strategic thinking skills, good critical thinking skills. A lot of times employees now are going to be forced to make an independent decision that they need, that they won't be able to go out and get a partner, as we used to say, and find somebody who we can bounce an idea off of. So I think, right now is kind of a special hiring time. And so I really would love to see hiring managers and sales leaders spend some time really thinking about how is this position different today than it was 18 months ago? And then how might it be different 18 months from now? But I think we're in a very a very critical time, again, with this, great resignation going on. It's terrifying for some who are trying to keep, good A-player employees. But what do you need right now that maybe you didn't need 18 months ago?
Well, I'll pick up on that a little bit, talking about pandemic and swinging into what we hope is going to be the post-pandemic, but that's taking a little longer than any of us like. When we're thinking about what do we need for our organizations and what do the leaders out there need for their organizations, it's important to realize that while some organizations and some salespeople have successfully made the switch to virtual selling, not everyone has made the switch to virtual prospecting. Not every seller out there is going to be able to successfully bring in new clients and find new clients without in-person meetings, trade shows, and conferences. So when you think about the kind of salesperson you need for your team, what role does this play? How important is it for your sales team, for your people to be able to get in the door virtually?
I love that, Karen. Agreed.
Yeah, as we're, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, go ahead, Kim.
It makes me think of how then do we profile for these, right? In pre-hire selection. And what really springs to mind for me is we're going to look for ambition. And we do measure that. We can measure that. And it's not that ambition was never important, but when it comes to prospecting and that ability to kind of stick with it, we're going to look for people who have higher levels of ambition. We're going to look for people who have what we call kind of a higher level of conscientiousness, because they're going to stick to it. If you give them a plan approach, they'll kind of see it through and see, okay, does this work? And they're also some of the same people who are going to say to you, okay, this isn't quite working in this way, but here's how I found a way to make it work. And again, we always see higher levels of ambition in successful salespeople, but now there's a need to kind of pair that with some of the higher levels of conscientiousness, quite frankly, maybe some higher levels of inquisitiveness, like, okay, here's another way I can try it, right? And these are traits we can profile during the hiring selection. We also have an opportunity with some of our candidate selection tools to work with an employer to say, okay, let's talk about this particular role. And really now, with the way the world has changed, how can we change? How do we need to look at changing the profile of the ideal candidate? And how can we assess that for you? Ryan, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say it actually spurred more of a question than a statement to the three of you is that, what happens? What happens when companies are hiring like the wrong sales type, or that they have the right sales type but that sales type attrits to another organization?
Yeah, I mean, hiring the wrong sales type is frustrating and expensive, first and foremost. And and I think it happens, right? I call them mishires. Mishires do happen, but I think there's a lot of things we can do in the prep to ensure that that is actually not the case. And so, again, do you have a formal sales process? I think I've talked about this on the earning curve before, right? I have a 4-step hiring process, and it doesn't vary. It doesn't matter what client I'm hiring for. It's the same 4 steps every time. It allows me to do an apples to apples comparison of not only the candidates for that particular company that I'm interviewing for, but also comparing candidates across companies. And so, I think a lot of people, I ask the same type of interview questions based on the competencies each time. I make sure that we run candidates through an assessment, which Kim can talk more about. I involve the same people, right? And so I think right now, particularly consistency of interview process is also critical. Because, to your point, Ryan, like right now, like if people don't stay more than 8 to 12 months, that's a very costly endeavor. And so I think the other thing is, we've talked about culture in the past, but the culture has changed, right? Each company's culture has dramatically changed as a result of the pandemic. You don't have the same type of environment you had before. And so I do think it's about readdressing what's important right now for what your company needs right now. But really, the person that was a fit 18 months ago may no longer be a fit for the organization. Karen mentioned that as well. And so, having to do things virtually, I always had, Karen, I had the highest close rate off trade show leads, right? You got to see them in person. It was a highly charged environment. It was the same, it was a very, uniform group of individuals. And so I could have upwards of a 40% close rate of those people who'd come to a trade show and met me at the booth or at a breakout session. So, I think, you really need to, I think this is much more critical than ever before that you have a formal process in place and that you're really comparing apples to apples comparisons with candidates. Kim, you want to touch on assessments? Because I know we talk about that a lot here too.
Sure. Yeah, so using assessments and pre-hire selection is such a critical factor in upping the predictability that you're making a quality hire who will contribute in the way you need it to. And we can, generally speaking, when you look at these assessments, we'll look at personality, we'll look at cognitive ability, and through that, and depending upon the assessment you choose, we have some that are just fantastic because it really will lay out for you the predictability in terms of high, medium, low, that this person will be satisfactory in the role. And we look at not only maybe personality or cognitive ability, but we can also look at the fit in the culture. So in sales cultures, a lot of times or in sales organizations, you'll see a power culture, a recognition culture, an affiliation culture, a commerce culture, right? So if you are hiring somebody that in a startup and you don't have a lot of money, right, to pay them, if you're looking at somebody whose primary motivator in those four cultures is commerce, might not be a good fit. But if you've got somebody who really wants to apply that power, that's somebody who wants to work in an affiliative way, and again, looking at somebody who's got that high ambition, high inquisitive, high conscientiousness, that might really be the right fit. The other thing I see happening is that sometimes when hiring managers hire, there are some sales roles that you really do work in a team. And I'm not talking about I got a sales manager who's got his team, so to speak, these people that report up to him, but they have no interdependence in their work, right? That's kind of a group from the team effectiveness. When you look at a team, a true sales team that works interdependently to prospect, to work through the sales process, to close, it's really important to understand the skills and abilities, not only from a technical, but from a personality standpoint, that are the best fit for that team. And I see so many times that hiring managers under index on that and under perceive how critical that is. And then you get somebody in who feels like a square peg in a round hole, even though maybe on paper they looked great. And oh, by the way, they can show up great for 3 interviews. It's really, especially salespeople, let's face it. So kind of a couple things I'm noticing.
Now, taking that a little further on matching as not just skills, but the experience and the background of the individual with the prospects that the company is trying to go after. That's a piece of it too that a lot of times gets overlooked amongst all of the assessments and things and the interviews and things like that. But I'll just throw out a couple of examples. So there are certain companies that will want to pursue a seller from the market leader, but their company is an underdog, where a lot of times the seller from the market leader is like a fish out of water if they're representing an underdog because they don't have that brand recognition that they had relied on before. Also, a lot of times with the market leader, those sales reps inherited those relationships. The relationships were actually opened by somebody who's probably 3 rungs above them. And then they get to the new company who is the underdog, and they don't know how to open those relationships for themselves. So that's one example. Another example, and I understand this because our company does the executive level door opening, we're always asked to get our clients in the door for the first meeting with somebody who's either C-suite, SVP, VP, occasionally director level. And when you have a low-level seller like an SDR, somebody who's a couple years out of college, or somebody who's at home and just likes to talk on the phone versus an actual business developer, they struggle to hold their own in a conversation with a C-level executive. So if you're looking to get in the door with a C-level executive, you need a tenured business developer who can have that conversation. When they get that person on the phone and it's go time and it's that performance moment, they're not going to get a second chance. Like that person can't call the executive back a couple days later and say, oh, remember that conversation we had? I really didn't mean it like that. Let's try again. That doesn't work. They have one opportunity for success. And if they can't hold their own, they're likely to flounder, and there are a lot of missed opportunities. This is all what can be looked at as part of the hiring process. What is the match of the skills and the experience to the prospect group you're going after?
And just kind of the tie on to that, one of the audience members, messaged all the panelists, hire tough, manage easy. And that actually was, my motto when I was leading a 50-person, sales group, except I had one more piece to that, which is hire tough so that you can manage easy, but also understand what you're hiring for. Because I'm thinking of a salesperson in my mind right now that is a phenomenal salesperson in the type of role that she is in. But if she was having to do a lot of cold calling, she would, she probably would fail miserably. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about understanding your sales types, because sales roles are like different sales jobs, right? Somebody that is doing a lot of door openings, such as Karen's company does, she needs a particular skill set, for somebody to be successful in that role. Whereas, somebody that's doing account management type of sales role, that's very heavy on customer service, very heavy on relationship, that's a completely different sales skill set than, somebody that is doing cold calling, that, also has to deal with a lot of rejection. And like account managers typically are often poor at rejection, right? Because their job basically dictates that they need to be successful in every interaction. Whereas somebody in a cold calling role, for instance, it's what we call a numbers game, right? And they have to be attuned and to being able to deal with rejection and being able to deal with it quickly, moving on, and also being able to communicate a very short value proposition in a very short period of time.
Yeah, on that, Ryan, I think we should talk about, there's a couple of questions in here. I keep hearing the terms hunter-gatherer farmer being used to describe sales professionals. And is this what you guys mean by sales types? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. Christy, do you want to start?
Sure. Yes, agreed. And again, I like what Ryan said. I'm often interviewing people who say that they're a hunter, but when I ask them, but they keep what they catch, as we call it, right? And so they go out and they fish, but they get to keep the fish afterwards. And so I say to them, like, well, what percentage of the time were you managing an existing client base versus going out and hunting for new business? And a lot of times, when I hear things like, oh, like, well, 70% of the time I'm managing the current clients and 30% of the time I'm going out to hunt. If you need a 100% hunter role, that's not a good fit for you, right? Again, in a lot of companies, the quota is the quota, but it doesn't matter where it comes from, whether that comes from existing clients, if you're, again, if you're managing a book of business after the fact. And so it's, the company says, I need you to get $1 million in revenue. But if 70% of that, or $700,000, is coming from existing clients, that's a much different sale and a much easier situation than if I have to go get $1 million from people that I didn't talk to last year, who I didn't even know existed or didn't know I existed last year. And so, yeah, yes, I mean, Mike Weinberg has a funny phrase. He calls them zookeepers. So same thing, like, gatherers. So, I think that goes back to that sales type, right? And it's not just, we've talked a lot about characteristics and personalities and competencies and those type of things. But if you need a true hunter, or on the opposite end, if you need a relationship builder, right? And so, again, I also think, like, because I work with a lot of startups and everybody is in the software world for the most part with me, the difference between even a customer success or account manager and an onboarding specialist, right? Much different, right? Somebody has to be, the onboarding specialist may have to be a little more technical. This is most likely the very first person that your brand new customer is going to come in contact with. So they're going to set the stage. I say churn begins at implementation. Just like turnover begins at onboarding for employees. And so if churn begins at implementation and your implementation specialist, isn't a relationship builder, is struggling a little bit with technical skills or the product itself, that you've set your customer up for a bad experience right off the bat, and now you may have to be in a saves situation. So yes, Marion, we use those terms a lot. And I think it's even deeper than maybe just even some of those terms, but it goes back to what's the specific skill set that you need of that individual that matches what the company needs, what the customer needs, what the prospect needs. Earlier, Kim, I think you mentioned like the team selling, right? And for us in software, team selling could be a solution consultant or a sales engineer. So someone who actually runs the software demo, that they're a critical part of the team, right? And they can't, a lot of times I see people promoted into that role that are just technical in nature, but without a relationship building piece. And that's a big miss, right? Because that person is running an hour-long demo, or I did a training with a company 2 years ago where their software was so complex that it was a day and a half of training and onboarding. And so they literally brought me in to help with the soft skill side, to teach them how to make that training interactive, so they weren't just talking. So I think there's a lot of things, a lot of like little itty bitty pieces that people miss. They think I need a technical person because it's demoing the product, but if you just sit there and all you do is talk the whole time and there's no relationship piece or there's no questioning, again, there's a lot of discovery that can go on during the demo phase, and if that piece is missed, you're missing a lot of valuable information from the prospect.
Well, and then the tie to what Christy was saying too is, as a number of you may have heard, this phrase grow into increasing prominence, customer buying journey. And so, and I think, one of our themes among the four of us is understand what you're hiring for. And one of the reasons that a customer buying journey is so beneficial over just starting out with your sales process is the customer buying journey dictates you understanding how the customer wants to buy from you, the process by which the customer wants to buy from you. And then you map your sales process to that. But as part of mapping your sales process to that, you have to understand what type of interaction is needed at each stage of the sales process, and therefore what type of sales professional is going to best fit that, being able to interact with the customer, during the times that are, most important in their buying journey and your sales process.
It's a really important point that you bring up, Ryan, about that journey. And when I give seminars to CEOs, I always ask them, if somebody wanted to get in the door with you who didn't know you, what would they have to say and do in order to get your attention and have you agree that you wanted to have that meeting and not put it off? And they say what we do in my company to get the doors open. You research, you definitely have to research. You have to say something that's meant just for me. You can't say the same thing that comes off a script that was meant for 999 other people. You have to research, say something that's meaningful to me. You have to call me, you have to email me, and you have to do it more than once, and you can't say the same thing more than the one time. And that is the way to relationship build when you're getting the door open. But very few people actually execute that way, because then I ask them, okay, so how are you executing? How is your sales team executing to get these meetings with these executive level prospects that you want? And inevitably, they don't say what the thing that would have worked for them. They say, mass emails, they'll say, the same script, they'll do automated, sequencing and all the other fun technical buzzwords that don't have to do with opening up an actual relationship, a one-to-one sales experience, that not marketing, but sales experience for the potential customer. That fits right into this whole roles conversation. People talk about a hunter is a hunter is a hunter, and that is just not true. It's not my experience at all. Where we are, we put a magnifying glass over the word hunter. And within the world of hunters, there are actually different kinds of hunters. There are those who are great at going on the meetings and getting the sale closed. We call those closers. And there are also those who are great at initiating contact with people they don't know, creating a relationship, and getting that initial meeting with an executive. We call them openers. That's why we're door openers at COP Consulting. That's what we do. The door opener role is a really hard role to fill. It's the most common form of mishire, at least in my experience. It requires a different job description, a different set of questions. The person who actually interviews this person really needs to have done this job, because then they know if the other person knows what they're talking about, or if the other person doesn't know what they talk about. I found that that's a critical piece of this. We do role play interviews as well, because we want to see how somebody is going to be able to navigate a dialogue that lasts less than a minute and a half and you don't get another chance. So how can that person do that? Do they approach it with curiosity? Do they peel back the onion and ask questions as opposed to make statements for answers for objections? It's not all about rejection, actually. That's really not even a part of the world. It's just the right prospects who don't understand what you're saying just yet, right? So you always have next time to have a conversation with them when you get them on the phone. So making sure that you're hiring an opener, if you need an opener, is critical. Last point having to do with this is that sometimes the employers create the situation that Christy was talking about before, where the seller, who might be a great opener, who's done such a good job opening that they've closed sales too, and now out of the time in their week, they have to spend the larger amount of time in the week servicing a current customer, because there's no place to give the people to serve the current customers, so that that same opener has the ability to spend more time opening. That goes to the team selling approach, and having an opener open for a closer who can then pass it to someone who services the account, so each person can stay in their lane of talent. That's the way I've seen it operate most efficiently, yet very few companies employ it that way.
And I'd like to really tag on to what Karen said. When you look at the team selling, there's really a kind of some assumptions how easy it is to make it work right. I do a lot of work with the 6 team conditions for team effectiveness, and there's some real essential things that we look for to create effective sales teams, and these that work interdependently. And much of it is that they have a very clear, compelling purpose, and that they really know how to work interdependently. And here's the other third essential that we look at, is that you have the right skill and ability to meet whatever the team's purpose is. So in this case, eventually it's to sell, right? But there'll be steps in that, and each member may play a different role. The other thing we look for is we'll look for a supporting structure. So the work that the team does, is it designed well? We call this nerdy word task design. Norms. This is a critical issue when teams, anytime doesn't perform well, is that they just don't have norms that will allow them to do the job well. And then we're looking, do we really have the right size? So there's kind of like 6 elements there that before you decide that you want to create a sales team that literally works together to get the ball over the line eventually, or if you've got one is really struggling, that's the first place to look, is do you really have the conditions set up for success?
Yeah, the one thing that's kind of new that people also have to start thinking about when they think about the hunter-gatherer, in those types of roles. I mean, that's not typically how I label them, but but that is widely accepted industry terminology. But it is also, even if you're in a hunter role, let's say, you also have to have salespeople now that understand the role of marketing, in the sales process, because that is probably the biggest change in terms of the sales process, is I think there's a statistic out there is like 57% of customers, I think that number has even risen since the last time that was polled, are already well into the sales process in terms of research, because more tools are available to them than ever before, so that they don't have to engage a salesperson until later in this process. Now, I've heard some have taken that to say that marketing is replacing sales, which would be a complete misnomer, and I definitely do not subscribe to that. But salespeople, even in a hunter role, have to understand how that they can leverage marketing marketing resources. And marketing is getting much more involved in sales enablement, marketing companies more so than ever before. Marketing agencies used to see marketing agencies just be marketing agencies, but now we see them, advertising revenue operations. We see them advertising, sales enablement, and that's driven all by how customers want to buy. And, again, they have more tools at their disposal to buy than ever before. So a hunter can't just go out and be, a hunter has traditionally defined by the past. They also have to work, understand how they can leverage, marketing. They have to understand how the customer buying journey takes place to be effective in that role. And so just the nature of hunter, gatherer, farmer is, even as we define that for you, understand that that's changing. Because the buy, how customers buy is changing.
There's a question here about some strategies that we can employ to understand what sales type would be most effective for what we're looking to accomplish. Maybe that ties back into some things that Karen said, or maybe Kim can talk more about assessments, like what strategies are important here.
Well, teeing it up, just for Kim a little bit, is understanding, again, our theme is what is it that you're hiring for? And then, as part of that strategy, then you have to define who is the best person to fit that story or strategy. And then Kim, I'll let you take it away from there.
Yeah. So, begin with the end in mind in terms of we start with understanding that this is a salesperson. They are to drive revenue. So that, that fits pretty much all comers, but reverse engineering what we say is, all right, exactly how would they go about to be successful? Karen really hit the nail on the head, in terms of calling on different individuals. So we understand what it would take to be successful. Then we start to look at what kind of experience would you need for that? What kind of expertise? So true knowledge. Then we would say what kind of characteristics might be necessary. And so we start to lay out things that Karen's talked about, things that Christy's talked about. You can assess things looking at a resume. You can learn things looking through the interview, recommendations. But the greatest predictive value that you'll really find in increasing the chance that you have the right hire is using some sort of an assessment. The ones I use, we can increase that predictability that you'll make the right hire by 40%. Let me say one thing. Many times when I see, and this may not feel really good to our audience, but I'm going to say it nonetheless because it's the truth. Many times when I see a salesperson fail, it wasn't because of the salesperson, quite frankly, it was because of the manager. It's because you have a product that doesn't have a great value proposition. You have a product that is poor quality and poor reputation, or you have a poor culture. And a lot of times you're going to see this in a lot of turnover. But this is the other thing to think about. If your organization keeps turning over salespeople, all right, do you really not know how to pick? So your picker's broken, as we might say, so to speak. Or is it really time to look internally? And is it something about us that we don't have what we really need to compete in the marketplace? And it doesn't matter what salesperson we hire, because we got to get our house in order. We got to have a better value proposition, better quality product, better quality service, etc. So again, if you're turning over salespeople really quickly, and you're doing the things that we've laid out, respectfully, I'm going to say you probably need to look in-house.
I listened to, I'm going to pivot this conversation just a little bit, but try to stay with the strategy question. I listened to an amazing podcast in May. I listen to it all the time anyway. It's called My First Million. But the host of that show had on the former CEO of Jet.com. Also, he had started Diapers.com. And it was so interesting because one of the things they talked about was hiring A players and how did they go about doing that at those organizations. Now he's a venture investor, and so still hiring people today. But he called it like when he said looking at the resumes, making sure that the step change looked reasonable, or the progression of their career, like was each. And again, I try to look for this, and he said I don't even talk to them like until we've gone through the resume. So does each step that they've taken make sense? Like, are they taking a more challenging job, a job that will pay, would pay more, that would increase their skill set? And so when you're really looking at people who are, wanting to grow, lifelong learners, Kim, you talked about ambition. I think you can see, I thought it was super interesting because I try to do this. I think it's hard, but looking at the resume, did that next job they take make sense? Or do they take a step back? And then, again, and I always say like there are personal reasons, right? Family medical issues, things that are uncontrollable that would cause people to take a step change that doesn't make sense. But when you look at someone's linear progression, when we're really looking for A players, I say A players know when it's time to leave and take the next step. And then they know what that next right step for them is, right? They know what the next challenge is. Karen mentioned, the difference between, selling an SMB product, right? Selling a $10,000 a year product versus selling a $710,000 a year product. And are they, if enterprise is their ultimate goal and they want that 12 to 18 month sales cycle, by the way, that's a completely different sales type, right? The difference between a 30 to 60 or 90-day sales cycle and a 12 to 18 month sales cycle, keeping that ball in motion over 12 to 18 months is a very, very specific and special skill. But I also think it starts by, if you've done all the other things we've talked about and you've put the right job description out, the other thing we didn't spend a lot of time talking about is I try to write job descriptions that help people eliminate themselves, right? So if you're not this, if this doesn't sound like you, this is probably not a good fit. Because I hire extensively for startups, I say, if you need a dress code, if you need standard operating procedures, if you need an employee handbook, this is probably not the right place for you, right? So I also try to help people figure out what's not a good fit for you. But I thought the most interesting thing about what he'd said is, he said, I don't even talk to anybody until they've gone through the resume, like a true, very harsh resume vet, because he says A players, you can see the progression, you can see the step change, and they're taking the next right job that you would think that an A player would take.
I want to pick up a little bit on that job description and how important that is to it. Just as it will attract the right candidates, it should repel the wrong candidates. Similar to sales messaging, by the way, will attract the right prospects, and the sales messaging can also repel the wrong prospects. So when it comes to door opening in particular, I like to recommend that if you need somebody to come in and fill an empty pipeline, let them know right in the job description, no prior relationships will be handed to you. You will need to develop this territory 100% from scratch, because people who don't want to do the prospects, they don't want to do the cold calling, are going to pole vault over furniture to get away from that job description. And that is exactly what you want.
That's actually a great point. I mean, both the points that you made, Christy, and Karen, the point that you just made is, I see that as a huge mistake in the hiring process is that people kind of have this come hither, come and apply for this job. We're not going to tell you, we're only going to tell you the good about this job. We're in this role, this sales role. We're not going to tell you about the bad. But, the thing is what happens is the reverse. You make the sales hiring process very inefficient, because now you have to sort through all the chaff to find the wheat, whereas you can let the job description, basically do that for you, and, and save a lot of, heartache and inefficiency on both sides. And then to Christy's point, I think that is so true. Being able to show progression. Now, there'll probably be some dips in that progression because that's life, right? Maybe somebody is like, does something very ambitious, they do it successfully, and then they want to scale back a little bit. So in the interview process, you definitely have to work to understand the story and not just discount somebody that doesn't show a straight linear progression on the way up. But being able to show that progression, and I like what Christy said too, progression that makes sense. So if you go into a role that is, that maybe you're, content, marketing, and then suddenly you're the vice president of sales somewhere, that's an extreme example, but that doesn't make sense. Or if you start, or I've actually seen this, people will start from an intern and then they'll work their way up, and I think that that's great, right? But the speed at which that happens is, sometimes abnormal, right? You don't go from an intern to running a division or running a department in the span of 5 years or something like that. So there should also be enough time in that to season. It's like as you're learning new skills, it takes time to learn those skills. So if somebody's just jumping every year into progressively higher roles, even if that person is ambitious, even if that person is successful, you start to potentially run into the Peter principle just because they haven't had the time to acquire the breadth of experience needed to fulfill that role.
I like,
and looking,
go ahead.
oh, and looking at the job descriptions and just looking at the chronology, it's really important to remember 2008 and what that meant for layoffs. So if you're hiring a more seasoned salesperson or considering that, a word of caution is be very careful when a 26-year-old interviews them and peppers them with questions regarding 2008. I've heard some pretty significant stories where the candidate was actually very, very far down the pipe, so to speak, with having critical interviews, and for whatever reason, HR was more at the end than the beginning, and really actually 2 candidates chose not to take the role because, no offense to a 26-year-old, but a 26-year-old had no idea what was going on in 2008 and what that meant, especially with folks. I mean, it was across the board in sales, but like technology sales. So the other thing to be mindful of too is what happened in 2020, because there were a lot of salespeople who lost jobs, right? So that's a big, that's not even a nuance. That's a thing that should be considered. The other part
Absolutely.
is that when you are working with salespeople or looking at hiring somebody who's worked at an enterprise level, sold enterprise software, certain things like that, you may see that their progression is not necessarily in a larger company or making more revenue. It may feel like it's a little lateral, but they chose to sell a newer technology. Or, and I've seen this happen a lot, where premise-based, is going away, it's hyper-converged, it's in the cloud, things like that. So just, that's where it's really important to understand the nuances. And performance equals motivation times ability. Let's not forget that some people are just going to enjoy or be motivated to sell certain things. And again, performance equals motivation times ability. So if I'm more motivated and I'm able to sell, at, a tier 2 software, let's not ding somebody because they didn't choose to go to a tier 1, right? So some additional thoughts.
In a lighter moment, we're sitting here putting on this presentation for you, and I literally just watched my wife crawl on hands and knees right past me to avoid being in the camera shot for giving this. So just remember, the lesson from that is, this is as much a human experience as it is a professional one, and that applies to hiring, and you have that human dimension when you're hiring too. But thanks for inspiring me, Jennifer. That comment.
Well, we actually didn't talk about people who are comfortable on video, right? When you're hiring, how comfortable are they? Because one of the things I can tell you changed big time when it came to door opening and the meetings we're setting for our clients is once the pandemic hit, the prospects, our clients' prospects are all showing up on video. So if you have a salesperson who's uncomfortable with video, can't work the technology, can't figure out how to structure a conversation that happens on video versus in someone's office, if they can't figure that out and there's a mismatch between the prospect and your salesperson, you're going to be missing opportunities too. And that has to do with the hiring process. That's actually part of our hiring process, which is how do they handle video? We make our candidates send us calendar invites to make sure that when, as they're crossing time zones, they're not screwing that part of it up. I mean, there are a lot of little things that happen at 1,000 feet where we as leaders like to operate at 30,000 feet. But if you fix the problems at 1,000 feet, you don't have the expensive ones at 30,000 feet. So this is part of the process as well as how comfortable are they on video. The last thing that we didn't talk about before is reactive versus proactive selling. How much time have candidates spent reacting? So they might be RFP sellers where the RFP lands in their lap and they're great at taking that to the finish line, but they're not the ones who initiated the relationship in the first place or a new relationship so that new RFPs would come their way. They may have been the person who was following up on inbound leads or leads that came about from webinars and things like that versus reaching out proactively. It goes back to identifying what it is that you need and make sure that the person who you bring in for the interview and then ultimately hire has that experience and the chops to get it done.
Karen, those are such great points. And the thing that I wanted to add to that too is we tend to look at the sales role as one single person. One of the ways that you can break down barriers in terms of being able to break through to more engagement with clients and increase close rates is the think of bringing in specialists. Maybe you have a discovery specialist that's really good at asking questions and basically working to collect all of the information that's going to be beneficial to both the customer, the prospect, and the company. So, a role doesn't have to necessarily be a single person as you're envisioning the criteria for what's needed at each stage of the sales process. You actually can bring in specialists that what am I trying to say here? You can bring in specialists at different stages, and it really becomes up to you as if you're a person, like if somebody handles the introduction or has a relationship, they probably should be involved at every stage of the sales process. But it is possible to bring in, a partner, into that, that's special to, to being able to handle a specific sales skill set, to advance the sales, to the next stage. And that's really, when you look at sales, you shouldn't just look at it as a begin or an end. You should look at it as a process and what is needed for each stage of the sales process. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. And that's, then we're on the high wire there a little bit.
Brian mentioned something earlier that I wanted to double back on, and it involved, again, because we're in sort of a scarcity mentality with hiring, right? More job openings than there are qualified people right now, particularly in the sales arena, is that the propensity sometimes for people to oversell their job early or go in with the big red bow without fully qualifying the candidate, right? So, again, I try real hard to, again, I want to give them an idea of what the job will be like and what the company is like and some benefits of it. But really, I mean, in fairness, like my hiring process really involves me vetting them first, right? And making sure that they're a good fit. They've got the skill set that I need, their cultural fit. They have the characteristics and traits that Kim talked about before I flip the table, right? And then become the seller and then try to put the big red bow on it and tell them why this is an amazing place to work. And so I think because people are like, I can feel the panic a little bit as I'm talking to clients about hiring and how long will it take and how much will I need to spend and those type of things. But again, there are great candidates out there who will make great salespeople if you're doing the right thing. And so, those people want to work for the right place. I love hearing people say, hey, listen, I'm in no hurry. I need to find the right fit for me. I need to make sure that it's a fit, that it's a match. I love hearing that versus I need a job, right? And
Yeah.
so I think making sure that there's a time and a place to sell, just like within the sales process, right? You're not going to, I mean, if you go in and just pitch your product or your service without doing a full discovery, I like to say it has to be all about them before it can be all about you, before it can be all about us. And so it has to be about the candidate first to make sure that, and I say to them, hey, listen, this is going to be a two-way street, but I'm going to start because I got to make sure that you're what we want. And then at that point, the wooing will begin, trust me. But I got to make, but again, if you just come in and start telling them how amazing your opportunity is, and Ryan brought something else up that I want to reinforce, which is, being transparent and authentic. The fact of the matter is, I say to people, and Karen brought it up too, as part of my helping them self-select out, is I put in the job description, you'll be expected to self-source up to 25 or 30% of the pipeline of your pipeline, right? You'll get an SDR, marketing is going to help, but I also expect my AE in certain situations to self-source. And so again, if that sounds awful, like Karen said, if they're going to jump over furniture because to get away from that job, that's fine. Right. So I think making sure that, I think sometimes when HR gets involved and people who are not necessarily living in the trenches with the sales team on a day-to-day basis, sometimes there's a propensity to want to oversell your job. And again, talk about being expensive, super expensive to bring people in. One of the things I do with employees about 4 weeks into the job is I schedule a post-mortem meeting and say, what weren't you ready for? What didn't we tell you? What didn't you expect, or what is completely different than you thought the job was going to be? Because I want to know what I didn't tell them, what I wasn't, fully transparent about, or what I didn't go deep enough into to make sure they fully understood. But it shouldn't ever feel bait and switch.
That's a super point. That is such a critical point. And and a bad hire in a scarcity environment has the exact same result as a bad hire in an abundance environment, right? And so the point that Christy's making, understand what type of role you're hiring for, but just because it's a scarcity environment right now, you still need to do due diligence to get that right hire. And I love what Christy said. And how many managers do you know of that do a post-mortem in their sales hiring process? And Kim's nodding her head. I can see it, not very many, but that's the difference between, skilled leadership and capable leadership and leadership that's just trying to check off boxes and take care of tasks.
And another aspect of fit, which is very important, is how well defined a company's sales process is. If you have a very well defined sales process, you can hire a salesperson who's not necessarily a strategist, because that person doesn't need to figure out the roadmap to get to the end game. Whereas if you do not have a well-defined sales process in your company, you're going to need not only a hunter who is an opener, let's say, in that role, but the opener also has to be a strategist, so that when they come in, they can figure out, where am I fishing? What is the right sales message to use? What are the right answers for objections? How do I get this proposal through? What is the structure? All of those things need to be figured out. And if you hire somebody who comes from an environment where they've never had to figure this out, and that's not their skill set, that's not their DNA, they're going to flounder in your environment, and it's going to take you probably 6 months to realize that you've hired the wrong person.
Boy, I've got an example that just is popping out of my head. I've had a recent conversation with a business owner, and they do home inspection services, and they've got this idea to expand and offer a different type of service. They feel very strong about their value proposition, but the value proposition is unproven because they haven't sold one of these new services. Looking to hire a salesperson. Now, the folks on my panel are going to start to cringe. 1099. I think I'll look at a retired person. And no, we've never sold this before. So what is wrong about this? Well, first of all, you don't have a proven value proposition. You want to hire a 1099. You want to hire a retired person. So as we talked, I said, why a retired person? Well, they probably want to make less money. And I said, okay, so you want their value in terms of a historic success, but you don't want to pay them for it. Well, yeah. And I said, and you really can't say to them and pass the red face test that your value proposition is proven. Well, that's true. How about your sales process? What's your sales process? Well, we don't have it. So I said, so you want to hire a 1099, a retired person, pay them way less than they're worth on the market, and you want them to help you figure this out. Yeah. Like, would you take that job? So this is where like 3-4 bad ideas equal like a disaster, right? And this is a great example of why you talk to somebody who has experience in this space, who helps you think about what the role is, who actually can also refer you to somebody who might need to help you with your marketing and even sales enablement. So it's that for our panel, I know is a very dramatic example of like, okay, this is just a lot of wrong. But, you know, for the attendees, some of that may not seem so off the mark, but it would be.
We are getting kind of close to the end, but I do want to ask, there's one more question here in the chat. They private messaged me, so I want to make sure you guys answered this. Are there any good interview questions we could ask to assess the candidate's motivation? Any thought on how to keep salespeople motivated?
So let me jump in with my Christie-ism before, and I'll defer the question to others, but my Christie-ism is, we can't motivate the unmotivated. We can only inspire the motivated. So let me start by planting that seed.
I'll rope right into that because, you know, I think any football coach will say it's the one thing that you can't, you know, I mean, I can coach virtually everything, but I can't coach motivation. So would you really want to spend your time trying to motivate people? Are trying to motivate people, or do you just want to, you know, spend your time, have good criteria for what you're looking for what you're hiring for, and hire a motivated person out of the gate?
So
especially in the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're talking about motivation in the abstract, which we can actually measure motivation and assess it in areas specifically that are good for skills. Some people on power, you could be highly motivated or lowly motivated. What that means depends upon your role. For a salesperson, we're going to look at someone who's motivated, you know, more by power. So if it would be better, if you want to talk about motivation and figure out what motivates somebody, you'd be better off to use an assessment that measures motivators' values and preferences, something like that, and then really talk about where they're highly motivated and what that means to success in the role. Karen, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, and when it comes to the door opener role, if you don't love this job, the job of door opening, it's torture, just torture. Don't put yourself through it. There's no way to motivate someone who's not motivated to do this part of the job, who doesn't love this part of the job for more than a tiny little blip. You can yell at them and you might get a blip of good behavior. You could throw money at them and you might get a small rise in good behavior, but it's not going to be consistent as it would be if you hired someone who truly loved this part of the job.
Well said.
I think we are at time. This was a great panel. I think we could talk about this for 2 hours. Next time we need a longer panel, Brian. Okay, so it looks like we're at time. We truly hope that you've all found value in our panel today, and we look forward to your feedback. Thank you to all of our experts and to the sponsors, and please feel free to reach out to any of our panelists. On behalf of Enterprise Bank, Commercial Trelor, Spoke Marketing, St. Louis Makes, and Carmody McDonald, we will see you back here in a couple of weeks for actually more about the sales team, how to hire the right sales team. So we can, in fact, continue part of this conversation. If you guys have any questions, of course, we will have different panelists on, but we will see you back here on September 14th. Thanks and have a great day.